Hmm. Uh, huh?
You're listening to Cryptid Clues, featuring your hosts, Taylor Field and Reuben Olson.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Cryptid Clues. I am one of your hosts, Taylor Field.
And I'm Reuben Olson. And as usual, I'm never the one to do the plug, so I'll bounce right back to Taylor.
Yes. Check us out. CryptidClues.ca is our home base. CryptidClues@gmail.com if you want to send us an email and reach out to us. Cryptid Clues on our social media channels, Twitter and Facebook as well. Be sure to check us out on Patreon because...
You can find exclusive content and you get episodes a week early. How hype is that? You think we're going to release an episode for Halloween? Nope, you've already gotten it a week before, so you're a little late now. In fact, we're already after Halloween at this point. So what am I even talking about? You wouldn't know unless you're a Patreon subscriber.
There you go. What are we talking about, though, today, Reuben?
Slippery, crawly, disgusting lizard men.
Yeah.
It's a very big umbrella term. Okay, when
Yeah.
Taylor was looking for things to research and he picked out Chupacabra, well, actually, it was somebody else that picked out Chupacabra, our Patreon subscriber, I suggested, hey, maybe we should do this. And then Taylor said, okay, let's do Chupacabra. Then Taylor went and picked out Lizard Man. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds fine. I will look up Lizard Man. And I started thinking about, you know, the typical aliens, reptilians, and stuff. And Taylor had reached out to me before I really did my notes in depth. And he was like, hey, I'm trying to stray away from the reptilian aspect, like the alien ones. We're looking up the actual like cryptid sightings of lizard monsters. I looked it up and there's a freaking million of them. There's so many. That was a hell of a time trying to make notes for this. But I have a few written down, mainly the good ones. There's a lot that aren't even worth mentioning. So it really boils down to like a few. And I think we could sum that up with the Intulo of South Africa. That's it. That's all I can mention about it. It's from a South African tribe. They believed it was like a deity that would sneak in, and if you see it, you're basically dead. There's the Lizard Man of Scapewar Swamp. There's a few sightings for that guy. There's the Thetis Lake Monster. We've got a couple of sightings on that. The Loveland Frogman. Gator Man's one I'll bring up. I didn't really read into that very much. And then finally, we have the Kappas of Japan, because I'm going to bring those up if we can talk about frogmen. I'm going to be talking about turtle men anyways.
Yeah.
And honestly, this is just leaving out the elephant in the room, which are the reptilians as an alien species. I think, if anything, lizard men, that's what I think about. Going from there, though, let's start with the Lizard Man of Scapewar Swamp. I happened to come across the Creek Indian legend. Taylor, did you also come across that as well?
So, in my notes, I have... I'm just trying to locate in here. Maybe kickstart us on there while I locate it in here.
So this comes from the Creek Indian legend, detailing an encounter with this creature. Several were out together and formed a hunting camp. A hunter came back one evening and said, I have found a big bear tree. He told the rest of the hunters, and they said to one another, tomorrow morning we will set out, build a fire there, and smoke the bear out so that we can see her. They slept, and the next day started off and came to the place. When they got to where the big tree stood, it looked as if something lived there, and they said to one another, a bear surely lives here, so they started a fire under it. The smoke filled up the hollow inside, and soon a big lizard came out. The people saw it and ran away. The big lizard jumped down and gave chase. It ran along till it caught one of them and came back with him. It came with him to the big tree and threw him down into it. Then it chased another and did the same to each in turn, overtook, caught, and brought him back. Only one was left. It chased him, and after it had gone a long distance, overtook him and brought him back. When it was coming through a place where the trees were thick, a tiger was lying asleep in it. When the big lizard got there with the man, the tiger awoke and jumped upon it. The lizard let the man go and jumped upon the tiger in turn, and they began to fight. The man saw this, jumped up, and ran away. Of the people who had gone far away from their homes to hunt, only one returned. He told his people how the big lizard had killed all of the others. Ooh, that's a spooky tale.
Like, I'm curious. So I don't want to slander his name or anything like that. But if something were to go wrong, let's say there was a dispute amongst people, could he not make up any story he wanted?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking that too when I read it. Not to doubt anybody, of course, with any cryptid sighting or report, you have to go into it with a fair bit of common sense as well. Usually, the most common answer, the most likely answer is the answer.
Yeah.
And chances of a lizard man dragging a bunch of people away and throwing them into a tree is not likely.
No, but equally terrifying. I mean, the thought of trying to go miles and miles and miles away to escape from this thing, and it follows you and it hunts you, that's terrifying. It gives me predator vibes.
Yeah. Although, interesting to note, there aren't really tigers in that area. It's panthers are more likely, I guess.
Interesting.
So it could very well have been a panther. But moving away from that, this is probably the farthest back you can go to find any report of the lizard man of Scape Swamp. This is in the same area. That's the first report of a lizard man-like creature that's capable of running and hunting people down. Moving on to more modern sightings, though, we have Christopher Davis. Do you have any notes on Christopher Davis there, Taylor?
I do. So starting off with his experience, I believe it was June 29th, 1988. He was 16 to 17 years old at the time. As you said, Christopher Davis was his name. He claims that he was chased by this cryptid, which is basically a lizard man, as we've brought up, that when he stopped, pulled over to change his flat tire on his car, he saw this thing walking towards him. Ooh. So how he claims the events that unfolded, he got into his car, he drove off, this thing jumped on the roof of his car. Mm-hmm. He hit the brakes, made it roll off the car, and he sped away. Now, I looked much more further into that, and I found that there were some conflicting reports with this. Christopher was shown to alter parts of the story. The distance of him from the creature changed a lot. And when you looked at the evidence, there were no photographs taken of any damage done to the car. There wasn't any proper explanation for if he was at the back of the car, getting the tire out, doing all the changes, then how could this thing get to him quick enough and then somehow get on top of the car? There's a lot of things that just weren't making sense and properly backing up his story.
Yeah. There are some notes there too. Like, it's hard to imagine that if you saw a lizard person running at you, you'd be able to get a lot of the details right the first go around. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'd misremember some things. Maybe you would fill in some of the gaps. At the same time, a lizard man is very unlikely. However, I do have a couple of cool newspaper clippings to read off here that have some more details to shed light on the situation.
This is in relation still to Christopher?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So this is from, I think it was called the Sumter. I'm not sure which newspaper this is, but basically you can just Google Christopher Davis newspaper clippings and it'll come up with two. So this is the first one here. Lee County seeks lizard with bad attitude. There's something amiss in the Browntown community where a mystery creature described as a scaly lizard has reportedly been making waver in the Scape Swamp. 17-year-old Christopher Davis said he was recently attacked while changing a flat tire on Browntown Road. He said its searing red eyes, 3 clawed fingers, and snake-like scales made him believe he was under siege by the devil himself. 2 other men told Lee County Sheriff's Deputy Chester Lightly about 2 weeks ago they were also chased by a similar beast while they were getting water from a spring. The mystery has fed on rumors, which have multiplied since Tom and Mary Way's cat. Oh, this is a very blurry newspaper clipping. Car or cat? I don't know. Quite a size difference. Anyways, Tom and Mary's cat was mauled last Thursday night while they slept. Oh, no, it is a car.
It is a car.
It is a car. The next sentence is their Ford. So, okay. Forgive me. This is amazing.
It's hard to read old newspaper articles.
It's like a cat car. You've watched My Neighbor Totoro, you know? Their Ford's torn molding, indented sidewalls, broken hood ornament, along with red hairs and footprints left behind indicate some animal was responsible. Ooh, that poor cat car. Man, this is so blurry. I love this. A wildlife officer on the scene said he would guess the damage was caused by a red fox.
Interesting.
Right? I didn't know a fox could do that. Tear off the molding, indent the sidewalls, break off the hood ornament. Okay, maybe break off the hood ornament, you know, if it was up on the car and gnawing at it and ripping it off. But no, maybe a lizard man would have a little bit more strength for that, or just straight up a person.
Yeah.
Anyways, so talking about this swamp monster in this thing here, we have a few other quotes from people. Waitress Lynn Mathis said she doesn't believe in such things. It must have been that one-eyed cow that lives around here. I don't know if they can go 40 miles per hour, though. Yeah, a lot of random quotes from people here. They really didn't focus on Christopher Davis all that much. Interesting to note, though, that there were 2 other people that supposedly were chased by it.
Yeah, it from what I could find, Christopher Davis, it seems like kind of kickstarted this a little bit. Mm-hmm. A lot of the encounters that followed spread throughout the summertime.
Mm-hmm. I do have a little bit more. That was the first newspaper clipping. This one, we actually get some more quotes from Christopher. So the first one really didn't focus on him all that much. Here we have another separate newspaper, perhaps a separate report. I'm not too sure. But anyways, picking off right where it leaves up here is the soft-spoken teenager seemed shaken as he describes his encounter. He was heading home about 2 a.m. and pulled over to change a flat tire. I wasn't drinking and I know what I saw, he said. I had just put the tire in the trunk when I saw this thing coming from those trees about 50 yards away, kicking up dust as it ran. He said the creature grabbed the car door just as Davis sped off. When he reached 40 miles per hour, he said he noticed it had caught up with him. I looked in the rearview mirror and I saw something and I heard a crash on the roof. But he said he was able to escape with no more than a scratch in his fender. Yeah, that's pretty much the most I can add to that is what he got to share in the next page. But 2 weeks after the Davis sighting, the sheriff's department made several plaster casts of what appeared to be 3-toed footprints, measuring 14 inches in length, but decided against sending them on to the FBI for further analysis after biologists advised them that they were unclassifiable. Anyways, state wildlife officials later declared the tracks to be phony.
Unclassifiable. Well, duh. It is an unclassified animal at this point, or entity.
Yeah. Now, sorry, Taylor, I've interrupted you like twice now. You're trying to carry on, but
by
you
all
can
means
finish off with this one.
With another thing on Davis's account, some of the information that was kind of changing. He reported that what he saw when this thing was approaching him was scales, and then that transitioned to being packed with mud. And then it changed it even further because he wasn't even consistent on whether or not it attacked his car in his stories. And that kind of stuff, it's not good. With all these holes in your stories like that. That being said, experiencing something like that would be traumatizing, traumatic. And like you mentioned earlier, if you are in that moment, you can't process anything. If you know you're being hunted all of a sudden with this green scaly thing running at you, just like this ad break. And we're back. Now, I do have something else on that note, though, especially of this area. Again, so several consistent reports followed throughout the summer of 1988, many of them mentioning unusual scratches and bite marks on the vehicles that were parked near the swamp. However, eventually, these reports gradually declined, with local law enforcement officers dispelling the reports as bear sightings. Now, it's funny how that kind of is a throwback to that first account that you mentioned, the bear, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone's looking at it as a bear, but I just think it's fascinating how the two seem to be associated.
Yeah, no, like this whole reptilian lizard man stuff really gets me because all I can think about are the aliens. And one of the things I was thinking about while reading all these reports is, well, what if it's just a little lost reptilian? Mm-hmm. You know, all his other kind dropped him off because he wasn't the brightest in the group. Now he's just living out there in the swamps all by himself.
Yeah, just like a one-off. I mean, absolutely. That's originally what I think many people thought Bigfoot. When you look at tell people, hey, there's lots of Bigfoot out there, they think, oh, I thought it was just one. Mm-hmm. That's what people go to.
I do find it interesting that the reports on this, again, go back to the red eyes that we brought up last episode. But carrying on from there, I mean, in order to bring up the fact that, well, what if it is an escaped reptilian? I can defeat that right away and say, if it is an escaped reptilian alien, you think they'd be smarter than that, because if they're supposedly doppelganging as presidents, what's it doing chasing down a guy and punching his car in?
Yeah. On the description, so again, if you aren't 100% sure what we're trying to talk about here and convey, these lizard men are reportedly bipedal, green scaly skin, 3-toed feet and hands, reported to have a height roughly 7 feet, and glowing red eyes. They also are reported to have a circular pad on each of its extremities. And basically, that lets them climb and cling to trees' walls. Kind of like Dover Demon style, essentially, with how it kind of would climb up things. But there you go.
And the description varies a little bit, too, depending on which lizard man you're talking about. Like, that's probably one of the most common ones.
Yeah, yeah.
But it never really seems like they all quite line up. There's always some little variance, which unfortunately kind of impacts the credibility of a lot of these encounters, too, because if you don't have something that's common between a whole bunch of reports, every single report becomes its own thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I put in my notes, too. The term lizard man, like, it's such a broad term,
Which is why it upsets me that we brought up an umbrella term for an episode. I was looking up so many things.
Well, it kind of goes hand in hand with when we did the rake episode, right? Because it's
that's
so many different terms.
But at least you can break down the rake. Like when we were talking about the rake as an internet creepypasta and a meme, here's what it's based on. Here's a few of the originals. This is like a bibliography of creatures that people have reported seeing, and they're all different ones. Mm-hmm. Some of them aren't even lizards.
Yeah, they're just associated with underwater features.
Yeah, pretty much. So speaking of underwater features, the Thetis Lake Monster, also known as the Canadian Lizard Man. So this is an interesting one. On the 22nd of August, 1972, the Victoria Daily Times reported that 2 local teen boys claimed to have seen a creature with silvery scaled skin, sharp claws, and spikes on its head, while swimming at Thetis Lake Beach in the evening. The newspaper reports described the creature as roughly resembling the gill man from the creature from the Black Lagoon. The RCMP investigated and found no evidence. 2 other boys fishing on the opposite shore of the lake also claimed to have seen the monster. However, when one of the individuals was contacted years later, he admitted that they had fabricated the story to get attention. So right away, I mean, this is kind of dismissed as a hoax. However, of the 4 people that were actually witnesses, only 2 of them eventually came out and said it was a hoax. The ones that were fishing on the other side just have not been contacted. What were they doing backing up that story? Apparently they weren't really related to the kids that made it up in the first place.
That's a common thing. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But you see that in at least movies and stories, that general kind of plot where, hey, someone's making up a lie, they're bullshitting, and they create this kind of manifestation of this story or this entity. Just
and other people just like jump on the hype train like, oh, I saw it too.
That, but then there's also the case where, hey, it's all just a prank, when in reality there actually is something.
Mm-hmm. And they were just boys. So
yeah,
interesting to note, local TV had shown a movie about a scaled humanoid gill man attacking teenagers at the beach after dark. 4 days before those teenagers reported being attacked at Thetis Beach.
There you go. That's a shame. I got really excited when you mentioned the Canadian lizard man. I thought,
Right.
This is cool. Another icon for us.
And now I just ended up calling us Canadians liars. At least when it comes to pronouncing things, we are.
Yeah.
Now, Taylor, you have some notes on something not very lizard-like. Loveland Frogman?
The Loveland Frog of Ohio.
Ooh.
This absolutely caught me by surprise because, like you said, we're looking into lizard men, and there were other reptile-like cryptids out there that I felt could be closely attributed to this thing.
Well, you look up lizard man, and I just keep encountering these things too, so we'll just bring it up. But, I mean, the Loveland Frogman, it's a small, 1 meter tall humanoid frog, apparently able to wield tools and emit sparks from a wand. You're a wizard, Harry Frogger.
Oh, I love it. I mean, you said it. The first reported sighting, reported in 1955, described as a humanoid creature with the face of a frog, a height roughly 4 feet with green leathery skin, bipedal cryptid, webbed hands and feet. So during the first sighting of this cryptid, a businessman in 1955 reported to have seen 3 to 4 of them. These creatures were basically squatting under a bridge in Loveland. He described them as having wrinkles as opposed to hair on their heads, with lopsided chests and wide mouths with no lips. In 1972, nearly 20 years later, no other sightings had actually occurred until March 3rd.
Before you go there, I brought up the tools and the sparks and stuff. This is back to that businessman. One of the things that he had described in his encounter with them is he was watching these things kind of like wield stuff around, and just as he was about to steal away, one of the creatures suddenly held what he could only describe as a wand above its head, and he claims that sparks spewed out of the end of the device, and he left as quick as he could.
Okay, I'm glad that you found that. I didn't find that in the information that I was digging in. It's mind-blowing. It obviously shows a sense of intelligence.
I believe it was from a later interview with the guy.
Okay. After I get through this, we'll have to touch back on that. That's crazy. So, 1972, 20 years later, no other sightings occurring until March 3rd. Police officers, now note one specifically named Mark Matthews, reported to have seen a 4-foot-tall frog human-like creature with the same descriptive features as this businessman claimed to have seen. This thing jumped over a rail and then into the Miami River from the police officers.
So he was like driving down the road, kind of.
I'm not sure. I could not find information as to how the scenario was set. The stage, basically. The cops were just there driving by, but it was multiple cops.
Okay. My notes differ a little bit. I have some details on that if you'd like.
Yeah, shoot them.
So mine was that the first one is from a police officer. There is a second police officer later, but they were not together at the time of the sighting. The first police officer was traveling along Riverside Road, heading towards Loveland, when he saw something basically leap out while there was a substantial amount of ice on the road. And he says, at first it looked like a dog by the curb, and then he saw the frog-like features and stuff. It leapt over the guardrail and went into the other area, the lake or whatever it was going into. So, I mean, that's pretty spooky, but in the span of seconds, I mean, he went from thinking he was seeing a dog to saying that he clearly saw a crouched frog-like creature, stood on 2 legs, stared back at him, and scrambled over the guardrail and scurried down the embankment. The officer in question, he described all the features and all that stuff, and he says that he went back and found no sign of it except for the scratch marks on the guardrail where the animal purportedly crossed.
And you mentioned there was a second officer, right?
Yeah, so a fellow officer followed up with a second report and a similar sighting, but he later retracted his report, saying he was only trying to back up his fellow officer who was being ridiculed. He did indeed encounter like another reptile, amphibious creature crossing the road. He even shot at it, but he exaggerated on the size and later went back and said it was just an escaped pet. It was probably like a pet lizard or something like that crossing the road.
Okay. Yeah, that backs the information I have. Mark Matthews was his name.
Now, do you have anything else on the frogman there, Taylor?
I don't. I did take note of that email interview he did, as he's now a retired officer, and he kind of, as you said, he comes clean about what he experienced on the road. But I do want to say I wouldn't necessarily let that dismiss the fact that his partner was ridiculed for something. There was something that was experienced.
And the same area, the businessman had also seen these frog-like entities wielding tools and emitting sparks from a wand. Like, that's kind of
Exactly.
weird. I do have a third sighting, though. If we're not counting the 2 police officers as a separate one.
Let's hear it.
This is the most recent one from 2016. This one's pretty funny. Okay, so a frogman was spotted in mid-August 2016 by Sam Jacobs and his girlfriend while they were playing Pokemon Go in Cincinnati. The location of the sighting casts doubt on its authenticity. That's it. That's the next sighting.
The location of the sighting casts doubt?
In Cincinnati. I mean, there's people. It wasn't quite as off the road like this last one was, apparently.
Oh, I see.
I'm thinking they were just seeing a Polyworld because they were playing Pokemon Go.
Yeah.
On another note with Frogman here, before we transition off to the next thing, artistic renditions of this creature are frightening.
Yeah.
Like, did you see any pictures online of like the dark, spooky roads and a flat-headed creature with wide glowing eyes just staring at you as you drive by? No thanks. I don't want to see that. For anyone listening, I'm sure you got enough of a mental image from what I just said. It's pretty spooky. Everything else is just laughable. Like, it's a big frog. Looks like something out of a children's cartoon.
Yeah.
What are your closing thoughts on the Frogman?
At this point, based on the evidence and the research that we have pulled, I believe more of the Frogman than I do the previous lizard man that we discussed. The lizard man that specifically is out of Lee County, South Carolina, the Scape or Swamp one.
I think, Frogman's more believable than the Thetis Lake monster or Canadian lizard man.
Yes.
The Scape or Swamp one, that one's iffy, but it's more believable than the Thetis Lake monster
100%,
one.
yeah.
Now, moving on, there's Gator Man, there's some local legends and stuff that don't really amount to much. Nothing with sightings, nothing with any extensive lore, just lizard things crossing the street. No good witness encounters. I'm going to just take this and say, hey, if we can talk about Frogman, let's kind of end it with the Japanese Kappa, because that one's super cool. But before I do that, we're going to have one last ad break. Whew, that last ad break moved at a snail's pace, or perhaps a turtle's pace, because we're about to talk about the Kappa. So, what I know about the Kappa, before doing any research, is that Kappas are a famous Japanese yokai. Now, a yokai is kind of like the Japanese thing for demon or imp or spirit. There's a few different things that could be classified as a yokai. It's their own general term for it. But the Kappa is a Japanese yokai known for living in streams and under bridges around water. They're mostly used as a scare tactic story to keep children away from dangerous rivers and such. Kappas look like a weird cross between a man, a turtle, and a frog. Kind of like a Ninja Turtle, except with a hairy bald monk patch for hair. And then they have like an indented spot on their skull where there's like a bowl of water. And then they have kind of a fairly flat shell on their back. Supposedly, if you encounter a Kappa, did you read about these at all, Taylor?
I read about them a long time ago, but not for this episode.
If you encounter a Kappa, brace yourself. It will rip your soul out through your butthole.
Is that quote unquote the real deal?
That's the lore for the Kappas.
Oh my
So
gosh.
there's a couple variations. They either reach inside and rip out your intestines to get at a mythological organ that doesn't actually exist, but it's an organ that's supposed to hold your soul. They rip out your intestines like a rope, like a big tug of war, They get to the organ, take your soul, and then they just leave.
Jesus.
The other variation is they place their beaks to your bum and just suck really hard and get your soul. They
This
suck
is
it right out.
actual lore?
This is the actual lore.
Oh my god.
Kappas are known for being pranksters, so oftentimes they'll just be in the water somewhere and fart and giggle and go away, and you'll have a terrible smell. But they can't handle farts themselves, which is one of the big defenses against a Kappa. If you fart, they leave. They hate it. They hate farts.
I feel like you're being serious.
I'm
This is
being-
real lore?
This is Japanese Kappa lore, yes.
This is wild.
Do you
Wow.
doubt Japan?
No. I mean, it's a real place.
Oh, I love them. It's great. But, I'm also a weeaboo, so what can I say? Getting into some more serious topics for the Kappa and defenses and stuff against them, because they have a whole bunch of defenses against this thing. If you throw a cucumber at it, it will appease the Kappa. It'll bend down, pick up the cucumber, and just start eating it. And then it'll give you time to run away. Alternatively, if you're approaching the shore or something and you know a Kappa's there, you can throw a cucumber into the water and it'll take it as a gift and allow you to spend time, bathe in the river, do whatever, and it won't hurt you that time, so long as you've given it that cucumber. Finally, if you have to, and a Kappa is about to attack you, you can bow to the Kappa because they are very, very polite and they always bow back. Mm-hmm. In doing so, the Kappa will spill the water from its bowl-shaped indent on their head, and it's a special source of water. Like, I don't know if it's connected to their power or something, or they have a special name for it. But anyways, if it spills that water, it cannot move because it's not in water, it can't refill it or something like that. So Kappas have been around in folklore for a long time in Japan. They're used in a lot of imagery and pop culture out there. But as far as explaining it as a cryptid goes, the most likely explanation for Kappas would be the giant Chinese salamanders that are also known to inhabit some areas around in Japan. Those salamanders can grow as large as a person. Imagine if a tiny child was out in the river playing and it happened to come across a giant salamander. If you had filled this kid's head with folklore on Kappas and stuff and told, oh, don't play in the river, the Kappa's going to get you, what's it going to think? What's the kid going to say when he comes running home to mom? Probably going to say that he saw a Kappa,
Yeah.
So, anyways, I wanted to bring up the Kappas because they're cool and I'm a weeb, but if any of these cryptids we've talked about today are real, Taylor, which one do you think is most likely to exist?
I want to pinpoint one thing about the Kappa. You really had me intrigued with it. Again, like the lore behind it was interesting. I had no idea about those things. But you mentioned
the whole parts of the parts.
that went all of it. It went over my head. I did not realize this was actually associated with its lore. But you mentioned some other key components to that, the offerings, and it's I don't want to say it's believable. I can't. We're talking about cryptids for crying out loud. So I mean, what really is and isn't believable is up to perspective. But with something like that, it's interesting because they had listed, as you detailed, different ways to handle this thing, which I found interesting, because you can't go out and really find, like, what do you do when you find a Bigfoot book? I mean, you'll probably find one, but it probably will look like kind of shady and like not super legit. This sounds like it's been passed down through generations. It is backed by its lore and its culture of what to do in these scenarios.
Well, and that's one thing about yokai and Japanese spirits and stuff in general, is their lore is so jam-packed, they always have ways of dealing with these things or avoiding scenarios altogether. Like, the experiences you read about from their legends and mythology is not presented in the Western sense where it's like a possibility, but it's presented as, this is a real thing, this is what you do.
Yeah.
Now, Taylor, if you were to encounter a Kappa, what would you do? Would you bow? Would you throw a cucumber at it? Or would you fight? By the way, if you fight a Kappa, it's a sumo wrestling match and they always win.
Is it automatically sumo rules?
Yes. So, I mean, even if
I
you
can't
spill
do
the
that.
water on its head, at least you can disable it, but apparently they always win.
How tall are these things reported?
Human size.
Human size?
Close to it.
I'm just thinking, like, if I have to go up against like a Michael Jordan, like I gotta get like jump up to smash the water out of his head, I'm probably just gonna bow. I feel like the honorable route, it speaks to me a lot. I consider myself to be a very polite person, respectful, so I would bow.
But are you being polite in the sense that you're bowing because you want it to fight you, or are you bowing because you know it's going to spill the water on its head? Because that's not being very polite or honorable at all. That's a tactic to get away from this thing.
When I said it, I forgot about it spilling the water in that sense. There's no... Okay. At the end of the day, I'm going to try to get the heck out of there.
So if you saw a monster about to attack you, just be polite and bow. Because you forgot about the water part. That's like your first instinct when seeing a Kappa is to bow.
This
Like,
is
oh, he's going to come kill me.
I see a dog man, I bow. All manners here.
See a dog man and you start barking.
Yeah. But to answer your question, all in all, the three ones that we talked about, the lizard man, the frog man, and the Kappa, I'm kind of inclined to believe in the frog man. Whenever I think lizard man, my mind just goes to creature from the Black Lagoon. That's what I'm kind of thinking. But I don't necessarily want to dismiss that because, and I'm going to lead this into kind of my closing thoughts. You mentioned about it, reptilians, and I just wanted to again mention that here. That's something that is connected to conspiracies, and they're supposed to have their hand in the earth. Again, we'll get into an episode where we cover all that kind of stuff. But it makes me kind of wonder about humanoid reptiles, and I think there's a lot of possible concrete stuff. Again, we're going to look more into the information, but I think it's interesting.
Well, you know, when a reptilian and a human love each other very, very much, their children don't turn out to be quite so intelligent and get set free into the woods.
Yeah, is that the case with the oh, I keep forgetting the name of that lake. Oh my goodness, sorry, the swamp, the Escape or Swamp.
Escape or Swamp and the Thetis Lake Monster, the Thetis Lake Monster, that one's probably a hoax.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you think? Out of the three, what are you inclined to believe? Or not believe?
I think the Frogman, it holds a little bit of water. The Kappas hold water.
The Kappas
sure,
are
on their
water.
head. But the Frogman holds a little bit of water just because the initial report is so strange and alien-like. And when it comes to aliens, okay, any possibilities open up now. I can't say that's unlikely. That's not like we don't know anything about them. I believe aliens exist, just don't know about them. So if someone says, hey, there's a frog alien, it does this and that, I'd be like, okay.
So you think the waving of its wand with the sparks, do you think that's alien more so, or just it like scraping rocks making sparks like fire caveman style?
Harry Frogger.
Harry Frogger. Yeah.
It's Harry Frogger. But maybe Harry Frogger has some magic to help him cross the road, you know?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of crossing the road, we'll cross paths again with all of our wonderful listeners next week. Taylor, do you have any thoughts to take us out with now?
Thoughts? Yeah, check us out. CryptidClues.ca for our blog, information, upcoming episodes, all that jazz. CryptidClues@gmail.com if you want to reach out. Let us know what you think of the show, what's going on. Just say hi. Social media channels as well. Cryptid Clues. Every Monday, as you said, next week we'll be back. And be sure to check us out on the Patreon because, again, we have our episodes dropping early on there, exclusive and ad-free, and there are some episodes that you cannot get on the main live feed that are available there. So, until next time, I'm Taylor.
And I'm Reuben.